Hi, my name is Dr. Frank Pasciuti. I'm a clinical psychologist, and this is my channel called Dr. Frank's Therapoems. Now, I'm the kind of doctor that's a clinical psychologist, and I've been a psychotherapist, clinical psychologist, for about 50 years. And recently retired, thought to myself, there might be things that I can share with people that could be found helpful that I learned over that period of time as a therapist. And one of the things I decided to do was to try to distill some major concepts down into some simple, rhyming, rhythmic poems that I call Therapoems. And the reason I call them Therapoems is because they're mostly related to topics that come up in therapy. And they're the kinds of metaphors and analogies that people remember later on. Oftentimes, long after their therapy is over, they may hold on to one of those metaphors, and it just gives them a reminder of what they have done, worked so hard on trying to accomplish. So today, I'm going to get into an area that is pretty familiar to most people who've been in therapy. Okay, welcome back to intimate relationships. How to get them going and keep them growing. This is part 2. But before I move on to talk more about how to keep a relationship growing over time, I just want to review very quickly what we talked about last week in part 1. And basically, you may recall that we had about 3 different poems, one which spoke to the idea of taking time to find who's right for you. The second one was recognizing and reeling back projections. So you really get a sense of who that person is, different than who you might have seen them to be in the beginning. And then staying in communication, which is a good segue into today's discussion, because if you're going to have a relationship grow, there needs to be some element of commitment in that relationship. And over time, things can happen. I remember when I first got married, I had a person in my parents' generation wish me well, but also said, long-term relationships and marriages, there's a bad year here or there. And I thought, a bad year? Holy smokes, that was hard to conceive of. But looking back right now, over 45 years with the same woman, I can see where there were times where it was difficult. Not just between us, but circumstances that arise, raising small children, dealing with finances on occasion. But there's that sense of a commitment to each other that leads you to want to work things out, bearing down. And a lot of times, working through the crisis itself can lead to growth. But let me share a little poem with you about that stage. And as you'll recall, and while I do say refer to marriage, I do mean and include committed relationships. And those relationships can be heterosexual, homosexual, lesbian, it matters not. If people are committed to each other and they're committed to growth, that's a good thing. So here we have it. This is called Till Death Do Us Part. To have and to hold until death do us part. Great concept in theory, sounds fine at the start. But during the years as a marriage matures, working things out and not heading for doors requires a challenge that's first not conceived. Or once there was lightness, and what you believed would be yours for the rest of your life. But don't call the lawyers just yet if you find that tempers prevail, love's no longer blind. Not feeling the love doesn't mean that it's lost, but fixing your problems may come at a cost. You may not believe that there is a way out, when earlier efforts just led you to shout and proclaim that the marriage is dead. Find someone to help you and bury your pride. We've all been in your shoes, all torn up inside. You may just not see it because it's too close. The problems you're having have been had by most. Yet when it's in your yard, the grass looks all brown. So just make the effort while you're both around and hold off on having to part. As much as it's tempting to give up and walk, the very best outcomes begin when you talk. So, the idea here is that most things can be worked through. And if both people are committed to doing that, you might find a way and find that the obstacles or the impasses that you encounter along the way could be grist for your growth mill. And if both people love each other, even if it's not evident, sometimes when you get in crises, it's hard to find the love. You have to maybe feeling other feelings that are getting in the way, fear or anger. But I believe if you work things through, either by yourselves or you get some help, you may be surprised to find how that love can reemerge. But the idea here is to be able to be open with each other. And being open and intimate, intimacy is basically the lifeblood of a relationship. And by that, I don't mean just physical intimacy. I mean the intimacy of sharing thoughts, feelings, and physicality. But some people are more inclined and able to be more intimate and open. A lot of times, maybe it comes from the kind of homes they came from, whether people spoke in ways that shared openly or shared feelings openly. A lot of times people can stay more cognitive and cerebral. And when you get in an emotional relationship, it's harder to understand and communicate with feelings. And some people just keep their cards close to their chest. But let me talk to you a little bit about another poem that will lead into what I want to discuss next. This is called Please Let Me In. Why are you afraid to open and let me in and share some of your secrets or how your life has been? Does it frighten you to think that once inside I'll see thoughts and feelings that I'll judge, which you must hide from me? You quick to share your thinking about the day's events, and don't refrain from telling me how your day was spent. And when I'm lacking knowledge about a needed fact, you're generous with what you know and teach me what I lack. But these are all safe topics and easy to be broached. The kind of openness I seek, the kind that can't be coached, requires being vulnerable and risking to reveal thoughts that are more intimate. They'll deepen how we feel. So it's important to note that an intimate relationship goes beyond the physical. And after it passes through that early stage where you're in first discovery and enjoying that blissful sense of love found, and the relationship deepens. And I talked a little bit about this in part one, where one feels free, especially if there's a commitment. One feels free to allow themselves to just relax into the relationship and not have to worry so much about always putting their best foot forward. I had a group experience once where I was learning early in my training about learning how to be intimate in groups and how group dynamics, or how working with other people in groups, how those groups can evolve, where with proper training and assistance, you can really come to discover that when it's facilitated in a way where people are taught to open up and they feel trust and safety, they may actually open up with each other in ways they don't even open up with their primary relationship. But we had a way of understanding intimate relationships and the ways in which people can learn and grow. I'll tell you in a sec. Back in the 50s, which seems like the Middle Ages, there was a fellow by the name of Harry Luft and Joseph Ingram. And they put together a concept that they called the Johari Window. And what I want you to understand is I want you to imagine a window with 4 panes of glass. And this is how people gain intimacy in groups, but also individually. And you might consider how this works for you. In the upper pane, we call it the open pane. And this is something that both you and I know about each other. Might be everybody knows this about us, or me. The next pane is the hidden pane. Now this area is about things only I know, and I haven't shared it with you. Maybe I don't feel I'm ready to do that, and everybody's got their own timing, or whether they want to share things or not. The third area is called the blind area. You and others may know it about me, and I may not know it about myself. And then finally, there's the hidden area. Neither you nor I know this about myself, okay? But in our sharing, we learn new things. I learn new things about me that would not have come about if it wasn't the end result of the process of us trying to learn and open and grow. So for instance, when I got in this group, I was very extroverted, may not surprise you, and I was sharing things. I I came to find that I wasn't taking great risks. A lot of times people will talk about things they've talked about many times. We call it refried beans. It's not something that they're sharing for the first time. But because I was extroverted, I was engaged in the group. And as the group proceeded, I think people wanted more from me. I was young, I was 23. I wasn't sure if it was safe. It was my first experience. But as the weekend progressed, what I came to find out, I got some feedback from people, and it was really helpful. It was done constructively. There's a right and wrong way to give feedback. But I found that people said, while we're still just getting to know you, you have a way about you that seems to engender trust, and people feel nurtured by you. And I had never heard that before. I thought that was really nice to learn. I didn't know about me, and they didn't know me. So that was one of those things that was kind of a gift out of the hidden area. So sharing thoughts and feelings are important. And when you move into feelings, and I also mentioned this in an earlier episode about sharing feelings, sometimes it's hard. That's harder stuff to share because particularly when they're feelings that you might experience them as jeopardizing the relationship, like anger, for instance, which is a distancing feeling. The idea that I might be angry at you or you might be angry at me can be kind of threatening. But alternatively, if I'm holding a lot of anger towards you and I'm not expressing it in the right way, of course, it creates distance. And this can undermine the intimacy, both physically and otherwise. So I would like to share another poem, and it's called Turn the Other Cheek. Sometimes I have to turn the other cheek to truly see. What lies behind your anger is not always clear to me. When I'm faced with heated words, they're scary and intense. My instinct is to shield myself and mount a strong defense. In the past, I tried to find solutions you could use to fix the situations where you thought you saw abuse. And due to my discomfort, I hoped they would suffice to quell your tense emotions, get you back to being nice. But now, just like a lightning rod, I take your angry flow. I let it pass down through me and then I let it go. And often once it dissipates, a softer side's revealed, where underneath your anger, old hurts have been concealed. While listening with empathy, I hear their cause and pain, which seems to help you let them go and free your heart again. Now when your anger needs release, I trust the storm will pass. Once it's allowed to run its course, it mostly doesn't last. I realize that to stop it slow by thinking conflict's wrong just causes more frustration and the tensions to prolong. Where once I thought that angry feelings left us far apart, I now can see that staying with them opens up the heart. So let's remember distance only grows when we avoid expressing angry feelings, frees the passions once enjoyed. I'm not talking about turning the other cheek as far as any kind of violence. This is not about physical hitting, but it's mostly the idea that sometimes it's hard to have your partner who you love and you want to be on good terms with be angry at you, okay? And so it takes a certain amount of restraint. And the best you can do at times like that is learn to be a good listener, have empathy. And I'll tell you what, I used to talk to people in couples therapy. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your partner is to actually let them express their feelings, and especially if they're doing it the right way, about something that maybe didn't really happen or isn't really true. But you let them get that out and you share and you understand, but you don't shut them down. You let them express it and you don't just necessarily try to shame them by saying this didn't happen that way. Because even if you tried before that, if they're very invested in their side, they may not hear that anyway. But sometimes it's good, and I think they'll appreciate many times when somebody gets something off their chest and they needed to say it, they do soften and they actually feel thankful that you allowed them to express those feelings. Excuse me. There's a man by the name of John Gottman who's got a book called The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. He's got some good stuff and he does a lot of workshops, and I remember reading this book and thinking one of the things he says is really important is for couples to learn how to confront issues. And a lot of times, some couples will just want to keep the peace. I often have had numbers of people come into couples therapy with me and say, we never fight. And I have to sit back, and maybe also in the same session they'll say that we haven't had sex for a long time. And I think, well, sometimes the shutting off and shutting down so as to not broach difficult feelings can also stifle your sex life. It's like, I don't want to touch you. I'm angry at you. I don't want you touching me. But the softness that can come from moving something through and working through an impasse can be very helpful. And you want to hug. I talked last time about it's hard to hug a porcupine. If somebody's got something on their chest and they're angry at you, you don't get hugs and you don't want to hug them. So Gottman would talk about, there's a few other things in his book, but these are important issues that we need to learn how to do. And I think as a marriage matures, as a relationship matures, you grant your partner the leeway. Sometimes the turning of the other cheek, I remember I worked a number of years ago with a shaman in Peru, and they had a spiritual concept called, eating the feeling, taking it in and passing it down through your body and sending it onto the earth, or what they would call Pachamama. And my analogy to that, my association was like being a lightning rod. And I might have mentioned that to you. You don't have to take it on, you don't have to wear it. Sometimes it doesn't apply, but if it's important, if somebody's being assertive and you need to hear it, then try to listen non-defensively, because maybe there's something in there for you to learn from. And who's going to tell you sometimes? Who's going to tell you these things if not your partner who loves you? It's not just because maybe what you're doing or behaviors you're exhibiting are undermining, inhibiting your relationship, but a lot of times friends go along with friends. We tend to take their side, and many times, the prolongation of a friendship seems to be unspoken agreements, if you will, that we just don't get on each other's case about anything. But it is important, and I have one more poem I want to tell you about, because this speaks to my philosophy about relationships, and this one's called Hold the Rope. He baited and switched, and after they hitched, seemed angry and dissatisfied. She got frustrated, but it abated once she sensed what he had inside. As she suspected, he blindly elected she'd be his true Mrs. Right. Then his emotion gave him the notion that caused him to want to take flight. Love had awoken all that was broken within him that had light concealed. They sought help needed and then succeeded to bring forth what had to be healed. Some say a marriage, though it's disparaged, can serve to promote each one's growth. For better or worse is not empty verse, but a vow that's upheld by both. So during tough times, when growth's a steep climb and marriage needs us to cope, each partner may need the other to lead and take their turn holding the rope. Now, what I mean by holding the rope is, I'm kind of a believer in marriages as growing correctional emotional experiences and growing experiences, especially if they're healthy and you care about the other person and you want to see them grow over time. But it's not always happening at the same time. Sometimes one of us is going through a difficult time and the other one's fine, but we're as good as the weakest link in the chain. So if one of us is having a hard time, it may be that you are the one who needs to be in the supportive position or learn to understand and help them through it. And it might be about the both of you, but they may be the one who's not necessarily consciously acting out, maybe unconsciously acting out. And I'll talk more about that in a future episode where we talk more about the unconscious and how things emerge. But the idea here is that if you're committed, I'll say to people, hey, it's like climbing a mountain together. We both want to get to the top. We're both trying to ascend to be the best people we can be. And sometimes, if you've ever gone hiking or if you've ever gone scaling mountains, sometimes you have to give the person a hand and help them up while you get your footing, while they get their footing, and you maybe are in the position to be the supportive one, because you're both committed to getting to the top. You both want to get the highest elevation you can. I'll tell you a little something from my life. I grew up in a family where both of my parents had their own struggles. My mom had MS and was in a wheelchair, and that happened shortly after my father and she got married. But he stayed with her for 50 years with that sickness, which wasn't easy because it progressively got worse. And 10 years into that, they decided that she could have kids. But at first, they thought it was terminal. My father, on the other hand, had his own struggles with gambling, and he was a person of the culture of his time, and that caused problems. But they both hung in there with each other. And I remember a very poignant moment with my mom where she said, he stayed with me during my sickness, and I stayed with him during his. And I had a lot of respect for that because they had a marriage that went on a long time. They loved each other, that was clear. They did their battles, and they had their struggles. They loved me, and they loved my sister. But I was blessed to see that despite some pretty extreme difficulties, they were able to weather those storms and stick it out together. So I do believe that a marriage is a people growing arrangement, and that if you should choose to marry somebody or get in a committed relationship with somebody and you want to grow together, there's going to be good times and difficult times. But as I wrote in a book published about 6 years ago called Chrysalis Crisis, sometimes the crisis itself, once it's largely resolved and you segue into how did that happen or what's to be learned from that, it can lead to transformation and growth. So anyway, that's all I have to say for today. I appreciate you listening, and I hope you were able to gain some understanding. And if you need any further understanding, there's other books out there about couples counseling or individual ways of understanding yourself and relationships. Have a good week. Thank you. Oh, one last thing before I go. This is a community space, and I welcome any thoughts you might have, comments or suggestions about future episodes. You'll see my email posted at the end of the credits. And I'm hoping that some of the poems and the information may have struck a chord with you. And speaking of chords, and so for now, I'll say goodbye and hope you'll try to give some thought to what was taught, and then abide in a place of peacefulness with lots of happiness inside.
Dr. Frank's Therapoems was produced by Le Splash Marketing. The poems and illustrations can be found in his book, Can I Be Frank? Poetic Insights that Empower and Inspire. Illustrations in the book are provided by Craig M. Lindemann. You're welcome to share these poems for non-profit purposes, but please remember to cite their source. Dr. Frank can be contacted at dr.frankstherapoems@gmail.com.